Today on DaVinci Elements, we're going to take a deep dive into text, both the regular text tool and the Text Plus tool available on the edit page in your effects library. So let's get started. Okay, here we are in DaVinci Resolve, and we've got some text controls up here. So we've got two different text controls that we're going to cover today. And these are the two basic text controls you will find over here in Titles in your effects library. If your effects library isn't open, you can do that by going up here to the top and clicking on Effects. And if you don't already have your media pool open, then it'll take up this whole thing here. If you're a little more limited on space, you can actually click this little button right here, and then that will open up your timeline all the way. And then you can only have either your effects library or your media pool open at the same time. I've got the wide screen here, so I can kind of get away with having them both. So the first control that we're looking at here is the text control, and then the next one is Text Plus. Essentially, the main differences between the two controls is the Text Plus, you've got a lot more control over how colors are managed, but it's a lot more difficult to get things done. But there are some other advantages to the Text Plus, which we'll get into when we get to that control. Helps you to do columns and stuff like that. So in this first text control here, you'll notice that we've got just a single control, but we've got different colors. You can see font sizes all in this single control. So, and we've even got a little background behind here, and we've got drop shadow and text outline. So we can get pretty fancy with this stuff with just your basic text control. And most of the time, this is going to be the one that you'll use. So now the next control is our Text Plus. So there's a few other things that we can do with it. Now, a lot of people aren't aware that you can actually get different colors within this control. It works completely different than the main text one that I just showed you. You'll also notice that we've got these nicely aligned columns, and you can do, like a whole ton of them. I think you can have up to 8 or 10 columns. I've never really gone beyond 4 that I've played with. Let's show you how this stuff works, how to do it. So we'll go to our first one here. I've already dropped the text in. Now all I did was to get them onto the timeline is I just grabbed it and I dragged it on like this. And my system is set to default to 5 seconds. I just shortened them to 3 for the purposes of this demo. So we'll go into this first control, and you'll see it'll pop up over here in our inspector. If your inspector isn't open, then you just come up here and click the inspector button, and that'll pop open. Once again, if you've got enough real estate to afford to do this, you've got this same little expansion tab, so you can click that and you'll see it pops it all the way down to the bottom. But most people don't have this kind of screen real estate, so it's probably better to work with it collapsed. With this tool, it's really simple to do this kind of stuff. We can actually just highlight a section of text. So I can highlight this here, the different colors portion, and I can go and give that its own color. And I can even change font options. So while this is selected, any changes I make only apply to that thing that's selected. So we can go in here and we can change this to, say, extra bold. And then we can take our fonts here. Oops, actually, we can take these and make them another color. So we don't have to match what I did on the first one. And now we can even take, we'll just highlight the word fonts And then I can actually go pick a different font. So let's pick something different than what I did before. There we go. That's a different font. And then if we want to take sizes, and we'll set that to extra bold. And then we can actually increase the size. So when that is selected, it'll only make changes to that. See how that works? And then we could even change that color again if we wanted. Like so. And you get the idea. It's pretty simple. If I want to come in here and have the bottom text underlined, so I can just go to right here where it says font style, and I can pick this underline one. And you've also got some other controls there. You can do that. Makes it look like a line between it. And you've got some alignment controls. Most times when you're using this type of control in this manner, centering is usually the easiest way. Now, we're not going to get into showing you how to get the text on the screen in a fancy way, like there's no animation stuff. I've showed you some of that easy stuff before in my other videos. I actually, just in my previous video for beginners that I just did for DaVinci 18, I show you how to do that in there. So go ahead and load that up and take a look at that if you want to learn how to do that really easily. Okay, and of course you've got your normal positioning controls, so we can move the whole thing to the left and right. Now these controls, they do affect the whole thing. It doesn't matter what may be selected or not selected. So I've just gone and deselected these for the rest here. You've got a zoom factor here if you want to just zoom everything the way it is without messing with the size setting of the text. If you don't want to adjust the size of the text individually to change something, if you just want to make everything bigger or smaller, you can do that right here with your zoom. So that's a kind of a handy control to have in there. And then we've got our stroke. So normally it's just set to 0, but as soon as we give it a little bit of a stroke, now it would apply to all of them, unless we have one individual thing selected. I've never actually tried to apply separately when it comes to this portion of the control, so I don't actually know if that would work or not, but I'll leave that for you to try out. And then we've got drop shadow. So if we want to add the drop shadow, this is where we do it. So we can just put a number in there. We want to go negative for the Y so that the shadow goes down, unless you want the light source coming from the bottom, which would then have it on the top side. And then if you want to add that background, that's where you do it here where it says background. Oh, by the way, you can also adjust your shadow blur and opacity here for your drop shadow. So for background, what you would do here is the height is default set to 0. So we're just going to give it some height. And you'll notice that it's not quite centered vertically, but that's okay. Just give it a little extra size and we can adjust that further down. Now you notice we got some corner radius here. So rounded corners you can do. You can make it really ridiculous. Or you can get rid of them entirely. So I'm just going to get rid of them because typically when I use this background for the text, I will run it right out past the edges of the screen. And then you've actually got an outline color you can apply to this if you want. You want that to be different, so we could make that white. And then as soon as I give the outline some width, you'll see it shows up there. Now, if I go down a little further here, we've got our position controls here. So we can just adjust the Y position of that box, get it kind of centered up, and now we'll give it a little more height, just to give it a little padding. So there we go, and you can even adjust the opacity. So if you want it just very slight, or you want it really dark, so you've got all these levels of controls with this simple text tool. Doesn't seem quite so simple now, does it? So now let's take a look at the other one, and this is where it gets a little more complicated. It's definitely not as easy to do stuff. So we'll just take a quick look here. You notice I don't have the other material under here because I'm going to show you how to kind of build that as we go. But if we look in here, if I was to take the word magic and highlight that like so. Now if I try to make any changes to that, like the size for instance, you notice all of it is getting bigger. It's not isolating just that highlighted word, unfortunately. And that goes for anything. If I change the color here, it changes the color for all of it. So you're asking yourself, how did I get those different colors on the other lines and the fancy outlines and drop shadows and stuff? It's done completely different with this tool. So it's more complicated to use, but there is more flexibility that the other tool does not allow you to do. So it does have its place. I just don't use it that often. However, when you're working in Fusion, you only have the main Text Plus tool to use there. So if you're going to be doing some stuff in Fusion with this, then this will start to make a little more sense to you when you get to Fusion. The first thing we want to do here is let's adjust our font. Now, unfortunately, unlike the other tool, we can't have multiple fonts selected within this control. At least I'm not aware of a way to do that. If somebody out there knows how to do that, make sure to drop me a comment because I'd love to learn. So if we scroll down our list here, you can see we've got some other options. Now this V-anchor stuff, you can play with that if you want. So sometimes when you choose a different font, the text will move a little bit. So if you've been using this in Fusion and you've got a bunch of fancy controls laid out, it can shift the position of the text. And an easy way to adjust that is to adjust your justification position. So right here where it says V-anchor, top, middle, and bottom here. So I've got a little bit of movement change I can do here. Now I used to expose these controls to the end user when I was building custom tools, but I found that it's more work to go in and change the labels of these in a custom tool when you're creating it. So I find it's just easier to use a different thing entirely and go into layout and just allow them to adjust the position that way, because then they can adjust it as much as they want. And you could always put limits within your control when you make it. Okay, so you've got all these other controls here under the layout tab. So once again, you can adjust your positioning here. And you've even got Z controls to make it look like it's coming close to you or receding. And you've got more size controls here. You can reduce the size. I think you can actually type in a larger number than 1. So if I type in 2, then you can do it that way. And then we've got perspective. So I've played with this a couple times. Still not really entirely clear on what it does for you. But it's there. And you can adjust your text rotation. So if we want to set a background here, we can. Now the only downside to background here is if I set one, right? So let's put this in. We don't have something that's resizable, right? It does the whole page. So if you're working within Fusion, then you can just mask out the areas that you don't want But since we're just using this on the edit tab, you don't have this option. So you may or may not find this very useful. Unfortunately, with the color white, alpha doesn't help you any to change the translucency of it. But if you pick another color, so if we went in here and made it a gray, like a light gray, then we can adjust the opacity of it a little bit with alpha. So if we come in here and adjust our 1 to, let's say, 0.7, and we'll just make them all 0.7. Sorry about that, I'm fat fingering the keys here. Okay, so now you can see it gave you a little bit of translucency, but if you want more, then we'll need to darken it up a little more. So let's go with 0.4, 4 and 0.4. Okay, and then we can adjust the alpha a bit to change kind of the flavor of that. So if that's something you want to use, you can. And I did use it on the example I showed you there, so that you could actually see the drop shadow that I put on the text. So now we can go up here to transform, but I'll just give you a quick run through on this rotation stuff. So if we do the X, so you can see what happens there when you're using the X. So we'll reset that by pressing the little button, and we can do it on the Y axis, which will do that. Okay. That's a pretty good effect. And then the Z gives you this. So with this control, there's actually multiple ways to accomplish the same job. You can just use whichever one works for you, and sometimes if you're making a custom control for somebody, you can give them a similar control in two different places, and one can be animated and the other can be adjustable by the end user. Right? So those are just examples of why a person might want this tool, but a lot of those aren't going to matter to you if you're just using it on the edit page. And then you've got a choice of layout, so you can lay it out based on a single point or the whole frame, or you can set a circle or a path for it. But that's probably a little bit outside of what I'm trying to show you today here. So then if we go to our transform, you notice we've got more rotation controls down here. And as you can see, they do a pretty similar thing. It's not exactly the same because the rotation point is at the bottom of the text instead of the middle. Oh, let's reset that. And then you got, instead of doing the whole line of text, this does just the letters themselves. And then once again, you got the same thing with the Z rotation. This is acting on the individual letters as opposed to the entire line of text. Now I'm resetting all of this stuff because we're going to be working with the columns and stuff in a little bit. And that's not really very suitable for that. So you've got some other options here. If you go into shear, so this will kind of turn it into a parallelogram. So you can do it this way on the X, or you can do it on the Y. Right? But this time it does it with the individual letters. Oh, let's reset that. And then if you want to mess around with the sizes individually between X and Y, you've got the ability to do that. So see how we can change basically the aspect ratio. Sorry about that. We can change the aspect ratio with this tool, but we're just going to reset that. All right, so now if we go into shading, this is where we can start doing the stuff with the colors. We're not there yet. We're going to do the columns first. So I'm going to take you back over to the main text tab here. And we're going to add another line. Now, just before we do that, we take a look at our H anchor. We might want to set it for center, so that center is the main body of the tool, and the columns will kind of be independent. Okay, so if we go up here and we hit enter, let's just go back and look at the original version so I can remember what I did. Okay, so these are our column titles basically. So we'll go back to this one. So I don't need to switch back and forth to see what I named stuff beyond kind of what I started with. So we'll just come down here, and now we're going to actually hit the tab key, and then I'm going to put in let's call it title 1, and then I'm going to hit the tab key again, and I'm going to go title 2, and I'm going to hit the tab key again, and I'm going to go title 3. Okay, so we're going to scroll down and open up tab spacing. Okay, so you'll see we've got numbers 1 through 8. So I guess that tells us our column limit is 8. So we can go to tab 1, and we can change our alignment. So we want our first column to be left aligned. So we'll move our alignment over here to the left, and then we're going to change our position. So we'll just drag this over, and we'll get it where we want it. Okay, and then we'll here and we'll select tab 2, and that's going to stay centered, but we're going to adjust that basically to 0. So I'm just going to actually double click that and type in 0, and then we'll go to column 3. I apologize for this noise, folks. Okay, so we're going to go here and we're going to move the alignment all the way to the right, because this is going to be a column of numbers, but it doesn't have to be. It's however you want to align it. And our position looks pretty good, but we'll move it over a little bit further. All right, so we can go back up to here. So now if we hit enter, and we'll hit tab, and we'll just call this description 1. Okay, so I just added another row of information in there. So now let's show you how to get fancy with the colors. And this is where it gets a little technical, but just hang in there, follow it a step at a time, and you'll be okay. So we're going to go over to our shading tab. Now under our shading tab, we've got some elements, and really only the first 3 are really used or pre-set up for anything. So one is for the text color itself, one is for an outline, and one is for drop shadow. So we're going to start with our element here. Okay, you'll see with this number selected, you'll see that it's enabled. So if I disabled it, right, then it doesn't fill it with anything anymore. So if you actually want an outlined text, that's kind of how you would do it. We're going to go in here and we're going to change under type in the properties section. We're going to go over here and change to gradient. And now if you look down here under mapping level, we're going to change it from character to text. Okay, it's very important. This doesn't work if we don't do it this way. Now you'll notice, I mean, you do see some gradient shading, and if that's what you want to use, then by all means just use that. But I'm going to show you a neat trick here. So I've learned a couple of things in playing with this. We're going to take our mapping angle and we're going to change that to 180 degrees. Okay, and that just simplifies making all this work. Okay, so we're gonna take this and we're gonna bring it up, and you notice what's happening here. And then we're gonna take this little arrow, which represents one of the colors, and we're gonna drag it till you see it start changing the line below it, and then we'll back it off a little bit, and then we'll tighten this line up. And you just gotta kind of finesse this back and forth until you get it at the proper dividing point. We can actually take this one that's white and we can change it to whatever color we want. So if I want that to be red, right, then I just change this all to red. Now we're going to be able to change the rest. We're just going to add more bands of color to our gradient here. Okay, so I'm going to take, and I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to click to add a new point of gradient. Okay, and then I'm going to add another one. So I'm going to take this extra one down here and I'm going to change its color to the new one that I want. So let's just leave it at yellow for now. We've got our yellow color in place, and we can just leave it like this if we want. You notice we've got a teeny touch of red up here. So we're just going to take this yellow and we're going to tighten it up a little bit. There we go. So now what we want to do is we're going to pick our element number 2. And you'll see it's not enabled. It's labeled red outline. It should just be outline. Some default that got set in the tool when they built it and they never fixed it. Okay, now we're just going to turn on enabled. And you'll see a very slight red outline around everything at the moment. So once again, we can come down here and we can use the same trick as we used before. But let's set our kind of a master color here first. So let's do a white outline for the very first part here. And let's give it a little more thickness. So we'll go back up here where it says thickness, and we'll just make that a little thicker there. We're going to check the box that says outside only. That way it's not processing extra pixels. It doesn't need to be. And we're not going to be making any perspective changes, so we don't need to turn that on where it says adaptive perspective. All right, so now if we go down a little further, once again, we can choose gradient. And we're just going to use the same trick as we used before. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our mapping angle to 180 degrees. And now we're going to take our first color here and we're going to change that to white. And since they're both white, we can actually just come in the middle here and we can add a couple things. Now, the first 2 lines of text, or first 2 rows, they're going to look pretty good with the white, so we'll just leave them both white. And we're going to create a couple little extras here. So we're just going to take this and move it a little closer to the other one, and we're going to change its color to, I don't know, doesn't really matter, I guess. We can make it, we can have it be dark blue, I guess. So you can see we've got character mapping level turned on, so we've got to change this back to text. There, that's looking a little more proper. So now we're just going to fine tune this. We're going to bring that down a little bit. We'll bring this one down. Okay, I think we're pretty good there. So now we're going to take, what do we set our color as here? We got it 0.772. So we're going to take this one and we're going to change these 2 down, and we're going to go to 0.772. And we'll do the same with this one down here. .772. So now you can see how we did that. Now, if you want to do different subheadings with different colors and stuff in them, this is how you would accomplish all that. And you can do different colored columns if you want. You would have to go and set your angle on here, your mapping angle. You would set that to 90 degrees instead of 180. And then you could have the color going in vertical columns. So depending on how you want to use it, it's really, really flexible. It just, by necessity, has to be more complex. Okay, and we've got a couple other quick tabs, but there's really nothing here that's going to matter to you in how you're going to use it on the edit tab. If you're in Fusion, then you can actually attach images to text, so the text gets made out of the image. But that's a tutorial for another day, because that's a pretty complex what you can do with that, and that really belongs with a Fusion tutorial rather than an edit tab tutorial. Okay, and then we've got settings here. So if you're using masks, you can make some adjustments to how the masks are being used, and some other advanced stuff we're not going to get into. And then you'll notice up here you've got title and settings. So if we go to settings here, you've got your normal master controls. So then you can make adjustments with this. See how that just moves the whole thing, including that background. Now this is where you could actually kind of accomplish what we were talking about earlier with having just like a limited box. Remember I was telling you about using a mask? Well, we can do something similar here. It's called cropping. So if we just pop this open, so if we take our crop top, so now we can bring this down and we can crop that box down, and we can do the same with the bottom. So we just increase that number for the bottom crop. So we achieved a similar effect to what we had done with the other simple text tool. And you've got all the other adjustments that you can make. If you wanted to flip the whole thing, you could do that. You could even flip it upside down, and you can adjust rotation. So you've definitely got some things that you can do here. So hopefully this expanded your knowledge in the elemental skill of the text tool on the edit tab. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you hit that like button and hit the subscribe so you don't miss our future videos, and hit that notification bell so you always get notified when we make those changes. And there's going to be a couple of suggestions that YouTube thinks you're going to like, and you're going to find them over here. I hope I'm pointing in the right direction. I seem to get this wrong, but there you go. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.